General Hospital spoilers reveal that one of the most intense shocks brewing in Port Charles isn't coming from a visible enemy, an overt conspiracy, or a sudden accident. It's growing quietly from within the system itself, in the seemingly harmless halls of General Hospital, nurtured by suppressed discontent and the long-held ambitions of an underestimated individual, Brad Cooper. While the whole town is focused on the legal and ethical battle surrounding Portia and Nina, few realize that Brad, the one lurking in the shadows, drawn into a conspiracy with no share of the rewards, is the key player in the coming explosion. Brad has long lived on the fragile line between loyalty and rebellion. He was once a silent right-hand man in Selena Wu's power network, a powerful ant who ran an underground world full of schemes with a velvet-gloved iron fist. But loyalty only lasts as long as one feels they are not being exploited without a voice. For Brad, constantly being treated as a disposable pawn, kept under close surveillance, and worse, used as a tool in Portia and Nina's dark plan, was the straw that broke the camel's back. These women didn't just involve him in poisoning Drew with hospital drugs, they quietly made him the scapegoat if everything fell apart. But Brad was no longer the naive pawn accepting his fate. In secret, he began to plan his counterattack, not only to clear his name but to step out of Selena's shadow and become a true force to be reckoned with. Brad started collecting pieces of the puzzle, from internal medical records, the origin of the drug used, internal email copies between Portia and intermediaries, to secret recordings he made during tense exchanges. He even had evidence that Jacinda, the girl hired to spike Drew's drink, had received cash from an account linked to Nina. And he had a copy of the bank statement to prove it. With all the documentation in hand, Brad didn't rush to reveal everything. He understood that true power wasn't in spilling everything immediately, but in holding on to the truth until the right moment, to bargain, to control, and to force others to bow. So, when Portia started pressuring him again, demanding silence, cutting off access to the lab, and ordering him to stay away from internal investigations, Brad exploded. He knew she no longer saw him as an ally, but as a potential sacrifice if the plot was exposed. And that was the moment Brad made the irreversible decision, to betray Portia, expose the entire plan, and pave the way for a new version of himself to step into the light. Brad's actions quickly became the focal point of an internal hospital scandal. An anonymous report, complete with original data copies, was sent to the medical director's office. The evidence showed that the illicit drug came from the hospital's stock, distributed through Brad, but ordered by Portia and Nina. Worse, Jacinda's involvement, now being investigated by a journalist, only made things more serious. Though the identity of the report's sender hadn't been revealed, many began to suspect that only one person had the knowledge, the information, and the motive to do this, Brad. This move immediately threw Portia into a new spiral. Not only was she under internal investigation, but she also faced losing her professional credibility and position at the hospital. Nina, who seemed to be outside the fray, couldn't escape suspicion either as financial transactions and links to Jacinda were being uncovered. And at that moment, Brad quietly met with Selena, not as a humble nephew, but as a man carrying new political power. He no longer asked for a role. He offered a partnership, with proof that he was now a force capable of flipping the chessboard if necessary. In a world full of betrayal in Port Charles, Brad Cooper, once the underdog with a scandalous past, was slowly becoming the leader of one of the most dangerous power networks. And as his wave reached the feet of those who seemed untouchable, one thing became clear, the game had changed. And this time, Brad wouldn't be pushed aside. He would stay. And demand what he believed was rightfully his. Brad was the first to touch the fateful vial, the biological agent originating from the hospital, that had been secretly handed to Jacinda to carry out a plot few could imagine, to take down Drew Kane from within. What seemed like a small link in Portia and Nina's grand scheme now became the catalyst for one of the most dangerous and insane chain reactions to ever occur in the darkness of Port Charles. And when the secret was ripped open, when Drew and Willow finally uncovered the truth, the entire facade of those once seen as allies would crumble, revealing a chilling and shocking reality deeper than they could have ever imagined. Brad, with his position in the lab, was the one who quietly accessed the special drug supply, disguised the distribution process, and manipulated the internal records to pass the dangerous drug into Nina's hands without leaving a clear trace. He thought his role would remain secure, that he would always be just the messenger in a larger plot, but he hadn't anticipated that the consequences would spiral out and drown everyone involved, including himself. That vial, once discovered to have come from the hospital's internal stock, instantly became undeniable, tangible evidence, leading back to every link in the criminal chain, and no one else but Brad left the first trace. Drew, after a long period of suspecting odd changes in his body, decided to undergo deeper blood tests, not only to protect his health but also to trace the root cause. When the results showed that the substance found wasn't street drugs, but a rare specialized medication only circulated within the hospital system, suspicion immediately exploded. With covert help from Willow, who had grown increasingly distrustful of Nina after a series of deceptive signs, the two quietly launched an investigation to track the true origin of the drug. And every silent piece fell into place until they discovered Brad had been the one who came into contact with the vial before it disappeared from the stockroom. This discovery not only struck Brad hard, but it was also a shock to Drew and Willow, for both had once believed Brad was neutral, more a victim than a mastermind. But now, with the truth laid bare, they understood that Brad's silence was no longer passive but a deliberate complicity. And what made it worse was that Brad knew exactly what the vial was for, knew who the next person to receive it was, and knew that Drew was the ultimate target. He didn't just hand over a vial, he handed over a person's life and reputation into the hands of schemers. When Drew and Willow uncovered the truth, everything changed. Their anger was no longer just an emotion. It became a driving force. Willow, who had been deeply hurt by Nina's lies, was now more determined than ever to expose everything, making sure no one escaped responsibility. Drew, with his fighting instincts, immediately reignited underground connections to gather more evidence, not only against Portia and Nina but also considering how to deal with Brad, who now had no place to hide in the gray area between right and wrong. The situation was no longer a personal conspiracy. It had become one of the biggest ethical and legal shocks the hospital had ever faced. If it were made public, it could cost Portia her position on the medical board, Nina her access to Wiley and Amelia, and Brad a criminal charge. But beneath all that, the most terrifying thing was the psychological and social effect it would leave behind. Once again, Port Charles would be plunged into a crisis of trust, where faces once admired would become symbols of corruption and cruelty. And as Drew and Willow prepared to expose the full truth, Brad stood at a crossroads he couldn't turn back from. One side was total destruction if he didn't act. The other was his last chance to salvage his reputation, if he had the courage to expose both Portia and Nina, as a form of public redemption. But whichever path Brad chose, one thing was clear, this shock wasn't just the end of a plot. It was the beginning of a new war, where every secret exposed would be paid for with blood, honor, and the survival of everyone involved. Brad is entering a new phase of his life, where old obsessions can no longer be hidden in the shadows, especially when it comes to the love that has never been closed in his heart, the deep, tortured, and painful relationship with Lucas. Although people think Brad has let go, that the mistakes of his past have caused him to retreat, the truth is completely different. Brad has never forgotten, never stopped loving, and it is this emotion, that complicated love between a chain of mistakes and a desire to atone, that drives him to pursue a new interaction. Second chance, he believes he can only achieve by completely changing himself, both on the outside and the inside. But this desire is not just a simple personal feeling. It has turned into a mission, something Brad sees as a campaign to restore his honor, rebuild his image, and most importantly, reclaim his place in the heart of the man he once hurt. Brad's involvement in the web of conspiracy with Portia and Nina was not just a moral slip, it was the price he paid for losing his direction after losing Lucas. Now, with a clearer mind, stronger ambition, and the pain still intact, Brad understands that if he wants Lucas to look at him again, he must become the man Lucas can trust from the beginning. This obsession is no longer weakness, but a motivation that is turning Brad into a different version of himself, proactive, strategic, and ready to face anything. He begins to rebuild the relationships around him, not to manipulate, but to prove to the world, and to Lucas, that he is no longer the Brad of before, the one who exchanged a child and hid the truth. He gradually re-engages in community activities, carefully rebuilds trust at the hospital, and especially creates small touch-points in Lucas's life through seemingly coincidental interactions he secretly arranges. Not to force, but to show Lucas that he is still here, still not giving up. However, pursuing Lucas is not easy. Brad faces a series of barriers not only from society but also from Lucas's inner struggles, someone who has spent much time healing, recreating himself after an unforgettable betrayal. Brad knows this, and he does not expect immediate forgiveness. What he wants is an opportunity to make things right, a real conversation, a moment where Lucas can see that the man standing in front of him is no longer the one who broke his heart. From here, a new mission begins. The mission to prove that love doesn't always have to end with mistakes. Brad understands that the whole town may turn its back on him again. Lucas may reject him not just once but many times. But he is no longer afraid. Because what is guiding him is not guilt, but hope. Hope that, amidst the madness of Port Charles, amidst the political shocks and family feuds, there is still something truly sincere, the love he has for Lucas, and the desire to be loved back in the right way. And if that means sacrificing everything, his reputation, his position, even his safety, then Brad will not back down. Because for him, this time, this is not just love. This is the survival of his heart. Brad is gradually breaking free from the shadow that has bound him for so long, not only the shadow of a past full of mistakes but also the shadow of power and control from his cold but shrewd aunt, Selena Wu. After years of living under Selena's guidance, carrying out shady tasks on command, Brad is starting to shift, no longer a passive pawn in a criminal game. Now, he is lifting his head and stepping into dangerous territory, where he is not only participating in the game but also reshaping the rules. With new calculations, Brad is quietly rising to become the true successor to the underground power network that Selena painstakingly built. This story begins when Brad realizes that Portia and Nina's schemes, especially their plan to take down Drew using hospital drugs, are not only lacking in sophistication but also too dependent on artificial secrecy, a short-term control that is fragile and easily shattered. Brad, with the experience he gained from a series of dark operations orchestrated by Selena, recognized the flaws from the start. But instead of exposing everything immediately, he chose to observe quietly, gather evidence, and more importantly, turn the tables at the most advantageous moment for himself. Brad's actions are no longer just about betraying Portia or Nina. He is playing a much larger game, one where the ultimate goal is not justice or truth, but the position of power as Selena Wu's successor. By progressively demonstrating his ability to manipulate information, control internal contacts at the hospital, and even turn the plans of others into leverage for himself, Brad is showing a capability that Selena once doubted he had, leadership in the underworld. And this is what changes the game. From being a pawn, Brad is now becoming the one who sets the rules. The revelation that Portia and Nina were behind the plot to poison Drew is no longer far off. When Brad begins to leak internal documents, when evidence of cash transactions between Nina and Jacinda starts appearing on investigators' desks, when the hospital's drug records are no longer sealed, the facade that was built up begins to crack. People are now looking at Nina, who once reigned among the elites of Port Charles, and Portia, who was once praised as a respected doctor, with suspicious eyes. And behind all these shocks, Brad quietly smiles. One of the craziest shifts taking place is not on the exposed side, but on Brad's side, the man who is now redefining who he is. He no longer wants to be the one who cleans up the mess, no longer wants to be the one enduring the Wu family's criminal legacy. He wants to own it. He wants to prove to Selena, and the world, that he not only can live in the shadows but can control them. And to do this, Brad is ready to sink anyone who tries to use him as a pawn. Portia and Nina, in their efforts to control Drew and restructure their influence in the medical and financial fields, did not foresee that the one who would bring their plan to ruin was not an outside enemy, but the very person they once considered an intermediary tool. They underestimated Brad, a fatal mistake. And now, as the layers of the story are peeled away one by one, as every phone call, transaction, and interaction is uncovered, the clearest thing is this. They lost from the moment Brad decided to stand on his own side. The story is reaching its climax, as Brad, once seen as the weakest link, is now the only one standing amidst the rubble. And from the ashes of the Porcianina plot, Brad will build a new empire, marked by revenge, the thirst for power, and the cold wisdom he learned from his aunt. This time, he is not asking for permission. He is rising to power. Drew, after a period of doubt and pain from the malicious schemes aimed at him, has finally regained his fighting spirit and is secretly formulating a comprehensive counterattack plan, not only to clear his own name but to eliminate Portia and Nina at their core, the ones behind the subtle poisoning plot designed to destroy his reputation in front of Willow and the entire Port Charles community. As the truth begins to reveal itself, Drew realizes that this is no longer a simple power play, but a life-or-death battle for honor, influence, and political survival. And this time, he will not fight alone. The biggest surprise is that Brad, who was once the intermediary in that plot, is gradually becoming a key player in Drew's counterattack plan. No one expected that Brad, who directly assisted in moving the poison from the hospital's stock to Jacinda, could flip and side with the victim he once helped harm. But that is precisely what makes Drew's plan sharper and more dangerous than ever. Brad not only holds crucial information but also understands how the underground network works, from Selena Wu to the shady transactions between Nina, Portia, and intermediaries like Jacinda. And Drew, with his instincts as a trained special agent, immediately recognizes Brad's strategic value. Rather than confronting him head-on, he quietly approaches, negotiates, and turns Brad from a controlled pawn into his covert ally. The story becomes even more twisted and complicated as Brad begins leaking internal information, not only digital evidence but also indirect confessions from Nina and Portia. Phone call recordings, transaction histories, deleted but recovered encrypted messages, even falsified medical documents used to legitimize the poisoning. All of this is secretly provided to Drew, in exchange for a guarantee that when everything blows up, he will be protected from legal repercussions and have a chance to start over. Drew agrees, but not just to shield Brad, because he knows the most powerful strike comes from within. Drew's counterattack plan is no longer just about exposing Portia and Nina to the public. He wants to dismantle the entire system they've used to manipulate Port Charles. From the medical network, the media, to the underground financial ties Nina exploited through Crimson and her upper-class relationships. And Brad, with the expertise and cunning he was trained in by Selena, becomes the perfect tool to plant fake information, apply pressure to Portia's former allies, and slowly corner them into a trap. One of the newest power shifts is starting to become clear. Drew is no longer just the victim. He is becoming the flag-bearer of an intelligent, silent, and ruthless purge. The real shock is that no one can predict who is standing with whom anymore. As Brad begins to appear publicly in hospital meetings with an unusually calm demeanor, and Drew is seen exchanging quick words with lawyers and medical officials, the atmosphere in Port Charles becomes suffocatingly tense. Portia begins to feel like everything is slipping out of her control. Nina, in her insecurity, begins to doubt even her former allies. And while they scramble to figure out how to control the damage, Drew has nearly completed the full picture, and the person drawing the sharpest lines is Brad. What makes this new plotline so crazy is that Brad, once the weak link, once the tool who was looked down upon, is now becoming the deciding factor in the battle between two powerful forces. In a world full of lies, where trust exists only on paper, Brad's sudden shift has become the clearest declaration of war to everyone. The betrayed may forgive, but the scorned will always remember and take revenge at any cost. Drew knows this battle will not end simply. But this time, he has a huge advantage: a tamed traitor, a spy within, and a counterattack plan built on the very ground the enemy once thought was untouchable. And when everything is exposed, only one question remains. Will Portia and Nina be able to withstand the counterattack that has been quietly brewing by the very person they once scorned, Brad?